Okay, good afternoon to everybody and welcome to this afternoon's webinar from the Miriam Institute. As ever, I want to convey my profound thanks to my colleague Rosita Panini, and also in his absence, I want to thank Alan Langer, our great and powerful colleague, our international coordinator. Unfortunately, he's unable to manage this webinar from today because he had a bereavement in the family, but we wish him and his dear family much strength at this challenging time. And I also want to thank, of course, Thomas, our colleague, for standing in Alan's stead and for running this webinar. Thank you to all of you, by the way, who are joining us through Zoom and also through Facebook Live. And if you're listening to this in a postcast by way of our podcast or on YouTube, we very much appreciate your time and your attention as well. Now, today, in continuation of our discussions about the Second Lebanon War, we really have a wonderful privilege. We have the opportunity to get a review of the Second Lebanon War as a retrospective, if you like, from the perspective and the viewpoint of the Israeli Air Force by way of a retired brigadier general from the IAF. And I'm going to introduce him to you very swiftly. His name is Brigadier General Avishai Levy. He served for 30 years in the Israel Air Force. It was a career that culminated as the head of intelligence and reconnaissance from the Israeli Air Force from 2007 to 2010. It was during his tenure that the Israeli Air Force successfully detonated the Syrian nuclear reactor. Prior to that, Levy served as base commander at Ramon Air Force Base, during which time he oversaw the integration of the F-16I advanced aircraft squadrons and Apache Longbow helicopters. Levy was also the head of the operations department for the IAF, and as someone who commanded 2 F-16 squadrons, he accrued extensive personal participation in major operations. He holds an executive MBA from the Tel Aviv University Rekanati School of Management, a BA in General Studies from Auburn University in the great state of Alabama, and he is a graduate of the Advanced Command and Staff Course Leadership in Warfare program of the United States Air Force Air University. So, General, it's wonderful to have you with us. Thank you so very much for giving of your time. How are you, first of all?
I'm very good. Thank you very much, Benjamin, for having me, and I'm very happy to be here with you and with the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just before we come to the subject of our conversation today, give us a bit of an overview. How's life in Israel? We read the headlines. I'm stuck here in New York, as you know, at the moment because of COVID-19. But how's life in the state of Israel?
Well, we are facing the COVID-19 too, and we have some issue with health, of course, for the second wave of the COVID-19. So the government and all the people are fighting that from one side. From the other side, of course, is the economy. And we are trying to find a way to do it together, both to stay health and the economy to keep running. So this is from one side. From a military and safe and security standpoint, we're in a time, and I'm sure that we'll talk about that we have to be very careful about what happened around our borders, both from the Syrian borders and so far from that. So I think the military fighting and looking forward to defend the country against some new threat coming to the arena. And like every day in Israel, you know, government and contents and everything. So it's a normal days in Israel and everything is great.
Wonderful. Well,
yeah.
It's really wonderful to have you with us. May I call you Avishai for the purpose of the webinar?
Sure.
Great. So Avishai, it's really a great privilege for us. We really enjoyed your last webinar, which I'd like to encourage people to go back and look at, which was entitled The 6-Day War and D-Day. And you gave this incredible overview of Israel's aerial campaign and prowess and success in the 6-Day War, and you did that alongside our friends Colonel Kemp and Colonel Collins, and it was based on a paper that people can read by you that was published in the Washington Examiner that really analyzed Operation Moked, which was Israel's preemptive strike against what was perceived to be the mighty Egyptian Air Force. So thank you for being with us. And
sure.
let's come straight to it. So we're running a series of webinars about the Second Lebanon War. Our previous guest was Major General Noam Tibon, who you know well, and who was the commander of the Northern Formation on the ground in his final position and specialized in Lebanon from the perspective of the ground forces. He had a lot to say. I'll run some of it by you. But I want to ask you, as we look back now 14 years on from a campaign, the Second Lebanon War. Tell us, first of all, where were you? What was your position and your role during the Second Lebanon War?
Yeah, so you mentioned in my bio that during my career, I spent some 3 years being the base commander in Ramon Air Force Base. So Ramon Air Force Base is one of the new bases of the Israeli Air Force at the south part of Israel. And Ramon was built in the understanding that we will have to fight during war while our bases and of course our cities are attacked by surface-to-surface rocket and missiles. So I did this job in 2004 and had the privilege to run this base through the Second Lebanon War. So during the Second Lebanon War, I was at almost 2 years as a base commander. Before the war, we were focused on bringing to the Israeli Air Force the new and advanced fighters, the F-16I, which you can see just behind me on the right side, the nice aircraft that we have there, the F-16I, I for Israel, is a very advanced aircraft that we built in the US, and we put some Israeli technology inside, and was perfectly built for us. So during my time, we were very focused of getting that and bringing the air crew and make sure that we are ready for anything coming. So out of the 100 F-16I, we in the Ramon Air Force Base were planned to have 75 of them. So the major part of the most advanced F-16 and the new fighters for the Israeli Air Force were planned to arrive to the Ramon Air Force Base. So this was one part. On the other side, Ramon Air Force Base is a very unique base which combine fighters, jet fighters, with attack helicopters. We in the Israeli Air Force hold the attack helicopters, not like the US, which the attack helicopters normally are in the Army side. And we, in Ramon Air Force Base, we're already getting ready to the arriving of the first Apache's helicopter, the new Longbow Apache's helicopters. So just before the summer of July 2006, we were getting enough of the F-16s and the Apache helicopters, and we were just after checking our operation skills in the base, and the base was, I might say, ready for war. Some unique areas that we were doing that, other than just preparing the base for war, and as I said, it was almost 2 years, we were replacing two of our squadron commanders. One of the F-16 squadron commanders and one of the new Apache's squadron commanders. So actually, the days that the war started, we were with new aircraft in an all modern new base with new squadron commanders ready to fight. So it was challenging, but we were running the war.
And so were both the F-16I and the Apaches involved in the Second Lebanon War? And was that their maiden voyage? It sounds like it was.
Well, it's much more than that. Actually, the Ramon Air Force Base was the base that launched the numbers of sorties and hours of airplanes, both jet and helicopters, from all other bases in the Air Force, because we had the most advanced airplanes, and because of the numbers, and of course because of the skills and the abilities of the airplanes themselves, the F-16 and the Apache. So we found ourselves in the end of the war counting the sorties and found ourselves #1 in the Air Force. So it was very operational and very tight time in Ramon Air Force Base. And in some area that our Apaches and F-16 needed to land and to take off from other bases. But other than that, yeah, the base was very and fully operation during this time.
And you made mention of the fact there, Avishai, that you were preparing for a response to surface
Right,
missiles. And,
right.
and that's very important in the context of the Second Lebanon War, because what I want everybody to know on this call was that the aerial defense that the State of Israel has become famous for around the world, specifically Iron Dome, David Sling, the arrow system, but for the purpose here, the Iron Dome, I think primarily, that wasn't there during the Second Lebanon War.
Right.
So just to explain to us a little bit about the priority placed on the Israeli Air Force after the kidnapping raid. For our audience, there was a kidnapping raid. It resulted in the taking and abduction of two Israeli reservists, Ehud Goldwasser and Eldad Regev. They were killed in the course of that raid, but that was also accompanied by the firing of rockets from the south of Lebanon by Hezbollah, and the Israeli Air Force really was tasked with responding to that, absent anything like an Iron Dome. What was the sense upon you, and what were the tasks put before you in that context?
Okay, so maybe we need to go, I'll say 5 years back, because during these 5 years back, Hezbollah was very busy in collecting all kind of surface-to-surface rockets. And meaning all kinds says normally about distance and range. The technology that Hezbollah had 5 years before was for a distance at around 40 kilometers, 20 something miles, okay? So they needed to come very close to the border if they want to affect the northern part of Israel. During these years, 5, maybe more than 5, Hezbollah and Iran put a lot of effort to trying technologically to bring and to bring into Lebanon a very much far and much more range for their surface-to-surface missile. And actually, we knew in our intelligence that just a year or a year and a half before the war, Hezbollah achieved and collected some hundreds of very long distance surface-to-surface rocket. So if we knew just before the Second Lebanon War that the threat area was the northern part of Israel, just northern to Haifa, and the whole the northern part of Israel, we believed and we knew already, according to our intelligence, that Hezbollah has some hundred of these long-range rockets. And we needed to prepare without any Iron Dome, like you said, and any active defense. We needed to be ready to fight while we know that our bases, our critical military areas, and our cities will be attacked. Both Haifa, which really happened, and we knew that it's much further than Haifa. And actually, the Hezbollah's leader said, we have some surprise for you and we'll use that. So being prepared for war in the years before, we in the Air Force needed to focus on intelligence to find where are they, putting them, storage them, what are their operational normal days, what they're planning to, what their program, what their operational program and planning to, and to bring into life and train with the operational plan if and when we'll need to fight. So the day the war started, July 12th, we knew that the threat to the cities of Israel and the civilian in Israel and to the military critical points in Israel coming and will come from the long-range surface-to-surface missiles and rockets that Hezbollah already had. This was the challenge for the Air Force, of course, more than just to, and I said just, but it's a very big mission to detect and attack the surface-to-surface teams and groups, and of course the launchers themselves.
And so there was this. There was. Thank you for that. That's a very, very interesting aspect of the background. I'm actually going to front load a question now then that I was going to ask you a bit later on. And that's the question, and I don't wish in any way, shape, or form to personalize this. I want you to, if you would, provide us with perspective about advantages, disadvantages, drawbacks, and opportunities when it comes to the Chief of Staff. Because in the Second Lebanon War, the Chief of Staff there was Dan Khalutz. And if the Israeli Air Force had been working very, very sedulously and very hard to identify how they might tackle the long-range ambitions and capabilities of Hezbollah's arsenal, it may well be that having a chief of staff who came from the Air Force brought to the helm somebody who was particularly informed and focused upon Hezbollah's capabilities from an aerial perspective. Is that one of the advantages, or do you view any other advantages or disadvantages of who should be the chief of staff and from which branch of service they might be drawn from?
Well, it's my personal opinion, okay, but I believe that the chief of staff has to be the best of the generals, no matter what branch he's coming from. Here, our generals are great and they can learn the whole area and the whole capabilities of the Israeli Defense Forces. Okay, now General Khalutz was the chief of staff, and he was the first Air Force general to become the chief of staff. And in a way, he came in the time that the perspective and the percentage and the effect of aerial attack and air attack all across the world. The US Air Force, the European campaigns, some other campaigns in the world, people understand, military people and generals understood the power and the meaning of air campaign. Either it was the only campaign needed in some area, or as the beginning of some war which you don't really know where it's going to roll into it. But air campaign as the opening fight or the opening stage of war was understood by all the generals. Of course, General Khalutz, which was a great and an excellent Air Force commander, just before he joined the staff, the general staff, I knew intimately the power of the Israeli Air Force. But I believe that it's not about being wearing blue or green who will let you do what you came from, what was good for Israel, what was the right way to do the war. So General Khalutz is a great man, a great general, was a great Air Force commander, and he knew the power of the Israeli Air Force very carefully, very.
There's also another dynamic to this, Avishai, that's very interesting, which is we'd withdrawn from Lebanon in 2000 after having been there from 1982, from the first Lebanon war. We then come out of Lebanon, southern Lebanon, unilaterally. Ehud Barak is the prime minister who oversees that. And whether one is for or against unilateral withdrawals doesn't matter for the purpose of our conversation. What I think is uniform across Israeli opinion is that people don't want to be stuck in what's called the bots Lebanoni, right? The Lebanese mad, right? That's the phrase that's bandied about in Israel. And so you have this kidnapping raid, the launching of rockets, and then suddenly the Israeli Air Force starts to retaliate and to push back. And Ehud Olmert is the prime minister at the time. Do you think that this idea of avoiding ground incursions into southern Lebanon is one of the reasons that so much emphasis was placed on the Israeli Air Force at that early stage?
Well, I think that the scar of the first Lebanon war and the memories, the bad memories of being, after you get in, it will take you some years to get back. These memories affect the planning and the building of planning of the operational planning. But other than that, we have to understand what was the challenge. The challenge was to fight the surface-to-surface rocket and missiles that as a terror organization, Hezbollah did not have bases that they were launching only from there. They were launching from all kind of launching pad through, of course, civilian villages, through vehicles out of the forest, in the valley, and their tactic was to hide. So if you want to fight the surface-to-surface capabilities that obviously will attack our cities and our civilian, you have to act fast. And the only way to act fast is a combination of air attack, of course, based on very accurate intelligence, and some special operation units. So it's not about preferring that or that because of history. No, the history affect in the way that, yeah, we as a country do not get again into the Lebanon mud, as you said, for another 2 or 3 years. But from an operational perspective, it was only because the understanding was that if you want to catch these guys, the launchers, the operational team of the launchers, you have to be 24/7 in the air with intelligent essence and attack essence, and to react very quickly. Either, and of course, if you can, before the launch, or just after the launch, because it's easier to detect them after the launch and to prevent the other launch, the tomorrow launch or the afternoon launch. So if you want to do that, and of course we knew that they have the long distance and the long range surface. If you want to bring the infantry inside, it will take you days, weeks, okay? And it's getting deep into Lebanon. So you had to be in the air. You had to be very powerful in the air, a lot of air platform in the air 24/7 to try to cover as much as you can from the area that you believe that are the launching area, and to react very fast. I think this is much more than just the effect of the first Lebanon war, was the key element to plan the operational beginning and starting of the any war, if will. Once you understand that the big threat, maybe the only threat, or almost the only threat, is surface-to-surface missiles and rocket. You have to be there. And it takes time to the infantry and the ground forces to get in and to search and to find and to fight and to eliminate. And you need to be there just before they are arriving to each and every part of every village. And of course, we knew that we did not have an ultimate intelligence. We didn't have 100% intelligence. So you have to search. This was the main reason to start and to bring as much power, air power, to the sky of Lebanon in terms to detect and destroy these launchers and teams.
And so Prime Minister Olmert has spoken many times since then, and I frankly don't feel that he makes this statement simply because he was the Prime Minister at the time of the Second Lebanon War. He's spoken very publicly and repeatedly about how the accomplishments of the Israeli Air Force in the first few days, in a very short period of time, was really the stuff of legends in terms of having prepared targets, in terms of accuracy, in terms of disabling the capabilities, not of all, but of much of Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And he's remained very, very adherent to that idea. And frankly, I haven't really heard of a counter view. Can you tell us what it was about the activities and the exhibits of the Israeli Air Force that really set it apart in the Second Lebanon War in the early phase?
Well, the two parts of that. One, as I said before, we focused on intelligence and we tried, we meaning all the intelligence forces in Israel and agencies and anything we could bring into the theater to know as much as we can, to find, to search, to learn, and to bring in accurate places of the long range missiles and rockets, okay? And actually, we know today and actually the second or the third night of the war, that we achieved that. Once we understood that we have the targets, we plan how to attack them very sharply. And in the second night of the Lebanon war, we had an operation and it called Sharp and Smooth. That was the name of the operation. And many dozens of Israeli jets arrive at night and in less than half an hour destroyed almost 100% of all the new supplies of Hezbollah, the long-range rockets that they planned to launch just the day after. So it was a combination of very accurate intelligence and a very sharp operational planning. And of course, the pilots themselves and the teams and the crews did an excellent job. It was a very complicated operation. We needed to bring as much and as quick bombs, smart bombs, and very accurate bombs to places that sometimes were in the garden of a house that 9 or 10 kids family lived there. So at the same time that we needed to achieve this achievement in terms of finding them and attack them and destroy these rockets, we planned to avoid as much as we can to hurt some civilian. Okay, and for that, to achieve those two goals together, we had to bring into plan a very complicated operational plans, and it succeeded. So in the night, in the middle of the night, just before, and we knew because we were listening and hearing what their command and control saying, we knew that they are going to launch it to Haifa and even southern than Haifa, up to Tel Aviv, okay? And as you mentioned, we did not have any Iron Dome and any active detect system, defense system. We knew that we must succeed in that. We must. It's not about hurting the Air Force, it's about hurting the people in Israel very badly. So this operational, we called it Sharp and Smooth before, was a very important plan for us. We trained about that. Once the intelligence arrived, once we knew or we thought we know where are the targets, there were some dozens of them all across Lebanon, and we prepared an operational plan to attack them. You know, when you plan that during a peacetime or day to day, and you train that, you don't really believe sometimes that you're going to use that. But the plan was so complicated that if you didn't bring all your sharp into the training, it was a problem. So yeah, we had planned that, we trained that, and we launched that. And for the good of Israel and for the success of Israel, we, the Air Force, our pilots and our intelligence guys and our command and control guys succeed in this very operational, very sharp operation. So yeah, in terms of aerial attack, this was one part. And of course, we needed to catch as much as we can from the short distance or short distance of the surface rocket, because of course we have some civilian and some military bases on the north part of Israel, and the Hezbollah has thousands of rockets, and they did not plan to keep them. They were planned to launch them, and what actually they did. So the plan was not to attack the rockets themselves. The plan was to catch and to attack the people, the warriors, the Hezbollah warriors that were trained for many years to launch that and run for their lives. And we have a lot of achievement of, yeah, you might find the launcher before and attack them, but normally in the beginning of the war, you find that after the launch, And if you are trained well, you need to catch this team, these 3, 4 guys with their vehicle just before they are getting into a shelter and attack them and make sure that these guys will not attack and will not launch any rockets again to Israel. So this was the combination of why to do that, and why to bring, and what was the plan in terms of bringing the Air Force very powerfully into the sky in the beginning of the war.
So the goal was not just to get rid of the munitions, but also the brain power and the activation power that was really channeled through these Hezbollah terrorist fighters.
Absolutely. It was said that Hezbollah at that time had almost 100,000 rockets. So you cannot fight 100,000 rockets, okay? And 100,000 rockets, it's an amount, for Israel as a small country, and the north part is a very tight populated area. You cannot fight without any active defense system, 100,000 rockets. So the plan was to destroy the limited long-range missiles that they have, as I said, and to attack and destroy the few hundreds, maybe 2,000 warriors that were planned and trained and be ready and get the commands to attack Israel, to try to catch these guys and to kill them, just to kill them. And normally it was very far to civilian. So once the pilot in the airplane, and we had many examples, once you try to attack, you know where are they, but you understand that you might hurt some civilian. And there was much more than 1 or 2, some dozens of attack. It was called to cancel just because of that. So if you cannot catch them in the 2, 3, 4 minutes just after the launch, you may miss them. You have to be there. You have to be ready. You have to combine all the assets: the intelligence, the attack, the ammunition, and the sharp to get into to attack them and destroy them.
So I have a couple more questions about the previous war, the 2006 Lebanon war, and then I want to pivot to what the next round might look like in the event that there is another round. I want to get your perspective on a question. You've alluded to this a little bit, because you just said dozens of operations were aborted because of concerns about civilian casualties. Yeah. Aborted by the Israeli Air Force because of concerns about civilian casualties. But there's another aspect of this, which is that the response and the retaliation, the operation inside southern Lebanon by the Israel Defense Forces, including the Air Force, was a consequence of this kidnapping raid. That there was Goldwasser, Regev. Prior to that, Gilad Shalit had been kidnapped on our southern flank. Right. And of course, I think that those who follow the states of Israel and have done so for decades know the name of Ron Arad, a downed Israeli Air Force navigator whose whereabouts is still unknown. A lot of people look at that and they look at those numbers. They say 1 soldier in the south, 2 in the north. All of a sudden, there's an enormous raid that comes about. Can you explain from your point of view the significance of the kidnapping of Israeli soldiers? Just assess it for us. And you've done a brilliant job of explaining the strategic goals of the Air Force with regard to what weapons they were targeting and which launches, human launches of those weapons they were targeting, and the prioritizing of those targets as well. But just clarify to everybody, why is it that the states of Israel, what's the attitude of Israel's commanders when it comes to the kidnapping of our soldiers? Some people think that we're too sensitized and sensitive to it, and others think insufficiently so. What's your view on that? Can you shed some light?
Well, I'll start with saying a phrase that I think every mother of a soldier in Israel knows. The phrase is, "We will bring you back." We will bring you back, no matter what, no matter where, no matter how long it will take. we will bring you back. And this is a kind of a promise that we, the military, is giving the civilian. You all remember that we have a mandatory service in Israel, and mothers are not being asked if they are ready to send their kids to the military, to the Air Force, to the ground forces, to the Armors Division. They need to do that because we, Israel, need to have some military, strong military. So the contract between us, let's say us, the military, and the mothers, will take care of your kid, and we will bring him back no matter what. Now that sounds maybe, I don't know. People may say it's not a strategic. People may say it's not a way of military thinking, and it might try. But I think that we in Israel, and with our deep history and our values and our understanding of lives of Jews and Israelis all across the world, we believe that this kind of values keep us together, and the promises both sides, from the mothers to the military and from the military to the mothers. If anything will happen, we will bring you back. So having that in mind and feeling that and believing that, we need to do whatever we have and we can to bring these warriors back. And Ron Arad is still there. He is still there, okay, for many, many years. And we will try to bring him back. We'll do whatever we can to bring it back. And Gilad Shalit was in the Gaza just before the Second Lebanon War. He was killing up in Gaza Strip, and it took around 5 years. And it was a very intensive way of trying to bring him back, and we did. And the same for Goldwasser, of course, and his friends. So yeah, not always you can bring him alive, and it's sad, but we will bring you back. And you know, we're bringing back some warriors from the Yom Kippur War, 1973. And we're bringing back people from the Six-Day War, because this is our values and our promise to the people in Israel. Now, we were in a very shiny July days, and suddenly the alarm was hitting, and they said they kidnapped 2 soldiers. And it was obvious to everybody in Israel that it's not about negotiation now, or trying to have some diplomacy, or to have some telephone calls. We are going to bring them back. Adding to that, of course, all the political and the strategic and the effects and Hezbollah and Lebanon and Iran and Syria and Israel, of course, yeah. We're not as naive as it might be heard if you're saying only this sentence, but it's deep in our values, in our promise to our civilian.
Thank you. I think that that's very important that people hear that, and people hear it from someone like you. Now, one of the things I mentioned, I spoke to Noam Tibon, the general, the commander of the Northern Formation, and he said that the aerial campaign was such a success in the early stages, and you've described that there were many people at the senior level of the Israel Defense Forces and in the Israeli government who said, stop there, we've got the strategic advantage, Hezbollah is asking for a ceasefire. Do you think that it would have been sensible to stop at that point? Did you have a viewpoint? Where were you on that side of the debate? And ultimately, as we know, the ground forces were sent forward, and it was much more complicated once they were. But do you have a particular viewpoint about that?
I have a very sharp opinion on that. We needed to stop that.
Really?
We just needed to stop after 7 days, because we achieved, other than just bring these guys back, physically bring them back, we achieved almost everything almost everything we were planned to achieve. Now, we the military understood that in the last day of the war, no matter it will be after 5, 6 days or 2 weeks or a month, Hezbollah will try to launch their last missiles and to achieve some, news on that and to have some briefing and said we were survive against the strongly IDF. If you understand that you put your ego aside and you just face the reality and said what we wanted to achieve in these few days and what will happen once the ground forces will get in, the understanding of just stop that and ask the question, bring the question to the Hezbollah side and said, okay, we stopped, not because you asked, not because of the negotiation, not because of the war. We said our first hit now, and we are stopping. Now do your checks and make sure if you want to try us again. You have to understand, all guys, that during the first day of the air attack, Hezbollah didn't really understood how deep was the threat, the hit that we hit them. The command and control, some of them collapsed. They didn't know what really happened, how strong and how deep was the attack. And for this reason, even for this reason, just to hold up and stop for days or 2 or 3, of course, and let them understand how deep was the attack. And do they really want to get another 6 days of air attack? I think will be help them to understand that they want to stop. Now, where was their strength? Their strength was in 2 areas. Enough rockets to launch, if they had the manpower, and be ready for the ground forces to get in. Why? Because they were acting in a terrorist strategy. They were hiding after women and kids and children, and they know that our values will stop us for fighting them. So from their perspective, waiting in their area, knowing the ground, knowing the villages, knowing the underground tunnels, knowing everything, waiting from the ground forces was the right way to do. So back to your question, I believe strongly that if we were stopping after 6 or 7 days, after being very successful in our mission, and we knew it in the Air Force and in the ground on the IDF, we knew that we were very successful, and we knew that we have some more targets in our basket, some strategic targets, like the Beirut International Airport, which was attacked just symbolically in the second day. Symbolically, we could destroy all the infrastructure in Lebanon. We did not planning to do that before the phase of understanding, do we want to keep fighting? So yeah, for your question, my understanding and my stage was to saying, yeah, we needed to stop. We needed to stop after a few days.
So just a couple more, because frankly, everything you're saying is really adding so much perspective to a war that is very, very personal to me. As you know, I'm a veteran of the Second Lebanon War, and I returned as a member of the ground forces after the war, after being inside. There was a lot of criticism. What do you think accounted for the decision to move the ground forces forward, Avishai? If so much had been achieved, what do you think underpinned ultimately the deployment of the ground forces?
I'll tell you what, it's different when you think from a civilian perspective and a military perspective. And we, the IDF, the chief of staff and his general, understood that, of course. And when I say it's different perspective, we knew that our will finish everything as much as we can in our plan. They will still stay, the Hezbollah will have the capability of launching some surface-to-surface rockets. And we were counting our casualties every day, civilian casualties. Mm-hmm. And after the 6 or 7 days of air attack, Hezbollah, although no one in Israel knew that we were very successful in the long-range missiles attack, the northern part of Israel was still suffering from hitting. Okay, and we did not have an Iron Dome, of course. So once you can launch the rocket, it will hit Israel here or there. Okay, as accurate as they could if we were not hitting them. So I believe that the pressure on the leaders, on the civilian leaders, the government, the prime minister, and all the other leaders, that after 6 or 7 days of war, they were still suffering and getting hit by surface-to-surface rockets in the northern part of Israel, put a lot of pressure of our leaders, and make them make the decision of let's try to do that through the ground forces, okay? And now I don't want to criticize any of the chief of staff generals or the prime minister and his government, of course. But as a lessons learned, first from the first Lebanon war and what we believe that will happen during a long war, I think it will be fair enough to say today, and gently I will say that even at that time, after a week, that the decision to stop was probably the right decision for the state of Israel, and not because they will still have some rockets, because in the end of the war, after a month, they still had some rockets, of course. And we did some attack during the day after. We were very focused of defending our ground forces, yeah. And the focus, once you focus on helping and defending our ground forces, you take some assets that can attack the launchers. So instead of focusing only on the strategic target and the launcher warriors, you need to set aside and bring some force and focus to the defending and helping, of course, our ground forces, which is a very important mission in Israel, and will only be there, always be there for our ground forces as a combined force. But of course, that if you want to focus as an Air Force mission only with the launcher, and you don't have to cut the force and part of that to defend our ground forces and part of that to focus on the aerial campaign, it will help.
Avishai, do you think we right now have a Minister of Defense who was the former Chief of Staff? In Lebanon too, we had a Minister of Defense with a very light military background, Amir Peretz. Do you think it's helpful to have a Minister of Defense with a strong, is it necessary, not helpful, is it necessary to have a Minister of Defense in wartime? Obviously, one can't always anticipate upcoming events, but a Minister of Defense with a strong senior series of positions held in the military.
It's helpful, but it's not necessary. That's my opinion. I believe, like the Chief of Staff, where he's coming from, it's important and it's helpful, but it's not necessary. If you choose the right guy, and during the Gulf War, Misha Arens, as a civilian, was the head of as this office, and he knows as one of our best Secretary of Defense. So it's helpful, yeah, especially in the few first months of his career as a Secretary of Defense, because you have to learn a lot. But it's much more about who are you, what's your general perspective, what do you want to achieve strategically for the state of Israel, much more than just to being a military guy. So it's helpful, yeah. Is it necessary? From my perspective, no. The answer is no. You can be civilian and be a great Secretary of Defense.
So yeah. My last question before I start weaving in the audience questions that were submitted in advance. So you're deploying the Israeli Air Force against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, but one of the things that I've learned in no small part from you is that the Israeli Air Force never looks at the sum total of its enemies being the enemy against whom it's operating. It's always prepared for the joining of others to an ongoing conflict. So Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran in 2006, still today, and so forth. Who else was the Israeli Air Force looking out for as it started to set about its work dealing with Hezbollah and its capabilities and its launches? And why do you think those other militaries, those other countries did not join the fray at any given stage?
The answer for a question is divided to countries and organization. The easy answer is once you start a war with Hezbollah, the Hamas from the Gaza Strip will join. And now you have to fight two frontiers, Once at the north against Hezbollah, one at the south against the Gaza Strip, the Gaza organization, the Hamas organization, terror organization. There were some Al-Qaeda terrorist organization and groups in Sinai and the peninsula. So you had to be ready for attack from our southern borders, which Ramon Air Force Base, my base, was very close to that, less than 10, 15 miles from there. So ground defense, we needed to ready, because we knew that the Hezbollah and the Hamas rockets will not arrive to Ramon Air Force Base. This is one of the reasons that those F-16Is and the Apaches were putting in Ramon to be ready to operate 24/7. But as a ground defenses, we needed to defend against the Sinai border, which was very close. So one groups is the terror organization. Hezbollah at the north, Hamas at the Gaza Strip, some Al-Qaeda and some others from the Sinai Peninsula, or Hamas or jihadist Islamistic, and some others in Syria. Of course, we were watching very carefully what really happened in Syria. Hezbollah got their mission and their ammunition and rockets not through the space. They got that from Syria, either by ground transportation, but mostly through the air. Iranian cargo plane were landing in Damascus International Airport. And from there, all the launchers and all the rockets and all the missiles and all the munition and all the weapons were moved to Lebanon. So you have to take care of Hezbollah in Lebanon. You have to make sure that Lebanon military is not getting involved. To Syria and east to Iran. And to learn, to understand, to listen, to evaluate, and to know what's really happened in decision-maker mind in Iran and in Syria. Assad in Syria, and of course, all the leaders in Iran. So you're fighting a terror organization with, less than 10,000 people in Lebanon, equipped by a huge country like Iran, involving in Syria, which was at that time as a country, with leaders, with military, was military capabilities. And from the southern borders, you needed to be ready and to attack, if needed, the Gaza Strip. And that's happened all time in our planning and in our fightings against either one or two areas. Once we fight to defend Israel, if you fight Gaza Strip, you need to be ready to being attacked from the northern part or from the northeast part. Today in Syria, there are a lot of terror organizations in Syria. So it's not about the country, it's about terror organization, hitting, fighting, launching, or be ready to get into Israel, some kibbutzes and some area, civilian area. This is the way. We did that in the 6-Day War.
Right.
We were fighting Jordan and Syria and Lebanon and Egypt By the same time, we were facing a threat coming from Iraq, okay? And we were fighting that and facing that in the Yom Kippur War, which was forces coming from Libya. So yeah, surrounding by Arab countries that days and today's have some strength and some strong relationships, some other countries, make us, especially in the intelligence and the preparing the forces, needed to be ready each and every day than more than just one borders area. We need to be ready all days for many fronts fights. Absolutely. And we did that, and we had that in the Second Lebanon War. Yeah, we had one eye open always on the bridges, the aerial bridges from Iran to Damascus to Lebanon.
Mhm.
And we were watching that very carefully, very carefully.
So Jackie has asked a question. She says the previous webinar, she's referring to the one that I just did with Noam Tibon. She says the previous webinar spoke about raining down distraction on Lebanon in the next round. What would be different about an aerial campaign in a next round? And also, what would be the aircraft of choice used by the Israeli Air Force? Would it still be the F-16I, for example?
We will need to stop the fight, the aerial fight, the surface-to-surface attack, the aerial attack, and the ground forces, the Hezbollah ground forces attack as quick as we can. Instead of hunting each and every Hezbollah warrior, which will take us weeks, and meantime, Hezbollah and their friends can hit Israel, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, half of Israel, with their today's capabilities, launch capabilities, very accurate missiles today, and a huge amount of them. We will need to bring some pressure on Hezbollah command and control and leaders, on Lebanon command and control and leaders, and on the international command and control and leaders. And, you know, I'm not in the military yet today, and I might say only my opinion, but I believe that we will almost destroy Lebanon if it will happen. And we'll bring Lebanon, which are responsible, the country responsible to whatever happened in their area. And the government of Lebanon, from our perspective, is responsible for everything in Lebanon. We will need to explain to the leaders in Lebanon that we are not willing to fight this kind of war that Hezbollah will prefer. They will fight their war, we'll fight our war. And we can bring Lebanon to the Stone Age easily. And I think that if and when there will be another fight in the northern part, I don't want to be in Lebanon at that time. I don't want to be in Lebanon. And we have nothing against civilians in Israel. And we want, in Lebanon, I'm sorry. And we want to keep them alive. And we want them successful. And we want their happiness. And we want them to live in happiness and achieve and growing their kids and educate them and prosperity for all Lebanon. We really want that. But we will not let anyone hurting Israel with no serious response. And my belief is that if any organization or any country like Iran with their proxy Hezbollah will trying to deal with Israel again in the northern part, they will suffer a very, very serious hit from Israel, a very serious hit. And it will bring the state of Lebanon to places that were being there hundreds of years before. And we hope, I think, we hope that the international community will understand that before. I think we are dealing with that. And we explained that today. Because if tomorrow we will have some our soldiers kidnapped, we will bring them back and we will destroy Lebanon. Something we don't want to do, but our safety of our people, our country, our only country, needed to be defended as much as we can. So Jackie, yeah, your question is very important question, and it's bring us to a places that we want to do as much as we can without hurting the country, the infrastructure, the civilian, and their day-to-day life. But the way we are fighting Hezbollah, staying in their places, in civilian villages, renting some room in civilians' houses, and launching from their saloons to Israel will bring us to a place that we have no choice but to destroy this house and the village and the bridges and electricity and infrastructure and the airports and the ports and the energy storage and everything. So it's not a threat. I'm not trying to threat to anyone, but I think we will have to do that. And of course we can do that. I hope we will not get into the time, but we are ready to do that to defend our people. And about the airplanes, you can see from our right side, the F-16, from the left side, the F-35, which we already have. We have much more than only this kind of airplane. We'll use everything to defend our people, everything. And we have enough to do what we need to do, more than enough. That's it.
So I'll take another couple of questions quickly while I still have you. Just this next one comes from Daniel, and Daniel asks, does the Iron Dome render the Israeli Air Force attack capabilities more or less important in a future conflict with Hezbollah than they were in 2006?
Well, it's not only the Iron Dome, it's all the active defense system that we are having in Israel, developed in Israel, specifically for that threat, coming from short distance, long distance, from Lebanon, from Gaza, from Iraq, from Iran, from Sinai, from whatever. Okay, our active defense system, very specific for our needs, are developed. Some of them only by us, some of them together with the US agencies. And it's a level of defending from the short level to the space, and from just a rocket to a nuclear threat coming from Iran. We are building our defense system. Is it help? Of course it's help. Because if you've been hitting by rockets and you have no casualties or no serious damage, you can take your decision much easily. You have the time to take the decision, okay? But if something like, even September 11 happened during a war, and some building or some infrastructure or some energy facilities or some important military facility has been destroyed or hitting, your decision, our decision, might not be the same if we could defend that. So yeah, as much as we plan on our fighters to attack if we will need it, we put a lot of effort in planning, developing, buying, train, and operate our active defense, very advanced, most advanced in the world, our active defense system. So we can defend first our citizen, our cities, our critical infrastructure and let us the time to make the decision how to react or how to act in time of war. And it costs a lot of money. You know, there is a debate. You are developing a $50,000 missiles to hit a rocket that costs a few $100s.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about that. It's about buying the peace, the quiet, the relax of the citizen and the decision maker, the military decision maker, of course, the country, the prime minister. He can make his decision not under pressure of 20 kids killed by a rocket in Gaza area or in the northern part. He can make this decision, the military can make this decision. So we put a lot of efforts and money and billions of dollars in this Iron Dome and his brother's defense system. And of course it will help. But it will not cover Israel with 100% defending capabilities. There is no system that can do that 100%. So we will need at the same time to attack and to react and to plan and to fight and to destroy what we believe that together can bring the war as quickly as it can, with less casualties as we can, both military and civilian, and stop this war.
Last two questions for you, Avishai. The first one comes from Michael, and I think this is in response to a statement that you made earlier. We know of Israel's successes fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously, from the 1967 Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. Is the state of Israel still capable of fighting on multiple fronts with such a level of success at the end of those conflicts?
We have no chance for that, Michael. We have no other options than to fight. Are we as successful as we were in the Six-Day War? Maybe yes, maybe no. Are we going to affect only with military power? And is it going to be only kinetic power? No. It's going to be with all the area. We're going to defend our country with all our assets against anyone that will try to hurt us or destroy us. We'll do our best. We build our forces, both, as I said, kinetic and non-kinetic forces and capabilities, and diplomacy, and whatever we need. Special forces, special agencies, special units, special capabilities to defend our countries and our people and the state of Israel. And we'll do that. We'll do that. It might be not as easy as, it will hurt, it will cost, we will suffer, we'll have some casualties, maybe more than some, but we will defend Israel. No matter what, we will defend Israel.
My last question for you comes from Sharon. So Sharon begins by saying, General Levy, I want to thank you for all of your service to the state of Israel. As a pilot and somebody who has chased the sun for many, many years, now that you have hung up your wings, is there anything on the ground that grants you the fulfillment that your career in the Israeli Air Force granted you? How have you made that adjustment? I ask because I am the mother of a combat pilot who will soon be concluding his career. I don't know if she's in Israel or America, by the way, or elsewhere.
I was planning to say, Sharon, that it's an unfair question, but because you are a mother of a pilot, I cannot say that. Anyway, there is a lot to do and a lot to achieve and a lot to find out in the world, even after being a fighter pilot. But there is nothing as good as being a fighter pilot. So it's not the beginning of the end of your life, okay? But yeah, if your son and will hope that he will finish his career successfully and safely, of course. He will find a lot to do, and he will remember for the rest of his life his career as a pilot, as a jet pilot. Because there is nothing, from my perspective, there is nothing like being a fighter pilot, and a fighter pilot that his mission is to defend his state, his country, and his people. And saying his people, I'm talking about all the Jewish around the world and all the civilian in Israel, no matter what their religion. I was privileged to being 30 years in the Air Force, feeling that I'm doing a very important mission. And my goal is to be just one of many others, that their mission was to make sure that Israel will be here for the coming 3,000 or 4,000 years. So being a fighter pilot was my privilege, my way of life. I took a lot from that for my business life today. And I remember that for the good. So good luck with you, Sharon, and your son, and good luck to everybody.
Well, thank you. Avishai, thank you so very much for your time today. It's really been one of the most enjoyable conversations I've had the pleasure of having through our webinars. I reiterate that once the world comes to rights again, we at the Miriam Institute would really love to bring you over here and to have you lecture to live audiences. Thank you so much for giving us your perspective of the Second Lebanon War past and whether or not that serves as prologue. Your insight is always, always enriching to people's understandings. And on behalf of Rosita and of course me and our colleague Alan and Thomas, who's stepped in today, and everybody who's on the webinar, I reiterate our profound appreciation to you, not just for now, but of course for everything that you've done. And I would just say to everybody on this call that you're an example of the idea and the tenet that when it comes to the continued advancement of the state of Israel, its place among the nations and its place on earth, Hashamayim hem hagvul. The sky really is the limit, and even from time to time we get to punch through that barrier as well. So thank you so very much, Avishai, and I look forward to the next time.
Well, thank you for having me here. I want to say that I very appreciate what you are doing that in the Miriam Institute and all what you are doing there and all across the world for the safety and the prosperity in Israel. And I'm always willing to do whatever needed to bring our perspective to anyone who are interested in that. So thank you very much for having me here tonight in Israel or this afternoon in the US. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Rosita, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.